Welcome dear students. Today we are going to talk about the second part of Mahayana Buddhism. The main objectives of this lecture are to understand Mahayana Buddhism, to understand the philosophical nuances of Mahayana Buddhism, to understand the difference of Mahayana Buddhism with other Buddhist schools. In our previous lecture, we discussed about the early ideas within Buddhism and the development and features of Mahayana Buddhism in India. Today we will be focusing on how the Mahayana school built on the ideas of previous Buddhist philosophy. The philosophical aspects of this school can be categorized under following headings. The first is an ideal bodhisattva. In the Mahayana perspective, the personal enlightenment or arhatship was looked as an mediocre goal. In this connection, as has been rightly remarked by Harvey along with Cousin, that the complete and wholehearted adoption of the heroic ideal which is called as bodhisattva or Buddha to be path was focusing on compassion. It propagated explicitly or implicitly that it should be aspired by the all and not by the few. Thus, such a concept within the philosophy of Mahayana urged both the man and woman to join the pathway against the valiant few walking the challenging bodhisattva path. This call to the bodhisattva path, in the words of Harvey, was inspired by the vision of a vast universe that for its survival always needed Buddhas. Whereas compassion had been part of the Buddhist course, it was now accentuated as the motivating force for the overall bodhisattva path. The second in Mahayana cosmological dialogue. Even though previously the Buddhism may have understood the seeing of Buddha fields, writes William that the idea of seeing all the Buddha fields do appear to be Mahayana, as are the names of two of the realms, Sukhavati and Abhirati. Moreover, according to William's proof, suggests that the vision and revelatory dreams were vital in both the commencement and ongoing history of Indian Mahayana. Furthermore, seeing Buddhas and Buddha fields was a powerful impetus to religious practice for Buddhists during the seminal years of the Mahayana. In the Mahayana Sutras, Harvey additionally explains the Buddha uses exaggeration and paradox and reveals various heavenly Buddhas and high-level heavenly Bodhisattvas. These subsist in plentiful regions of the universe. In this view, to quote Harvey, a number of these savior beings, Buddhas and in times Bodhisattvas, became stuff of devotion and prayer. However, with regard to the additional terrestrial Bodhisattvas, Harrison qualifies that no passage in the early on text advocate devotion to them. They are signs and not saviors. Over time, the preliminary message of Indian Mahayana became clearer. It focused on the people and not to worship Bodhisattvas. They must become Bodhisattvas themselves. Now, concept of Abhidhamma. Thought in the discourse of Indian Mahayana on the Abhidhamma, the intent was to disband rigid views, Ditti, and to fetch about a fresher perception of the world. In this course, Cousins has shown up how apparent entities such as the mind were seen as a simply shifting collections of evanescents, quickly fading or disappearing events. The direct intuition of this was the experiencing of nothingness, or what it is called emptiness. In breaking down the apparent harmony of things, the rationale was to free the mind from stiffness. In time, though, the Mahayanists recognized that these analyses bent a prison similar to old one. Now the essential parts were being taken as fixed entities, and this was just as entrapping as older concept of soul or spirit. Compassion and skillful means. A new philosophical perspective developed based on the knowledge of emptiness. Greater stress was placed on skillful means and compassion. In addition, Harvey remarks how the Buddha was now undoubtedly seen as having diverse levels of teaching for people with changeable capabilities. This may have appeared perplexing because some of the superior level instruction engaged in unearthing certain oversimplified lessons at the lower levels. Although the Buddha's ultimate message was that everyone can become omniscient Buddhas, this would have been hard to comprehend as a foundational teaching. For those with minor capabilities, the Buddha therefore began by the four realities for the spiritually ennobled. The aim was to become an arhat in order to attain nirvana. However, for those who listened additional, the Buddha taught that true nirvana is achieved at Buddhahood and all can achieve this, even the arhats who may have thought that they had reached the goal. Absence of antagonism. A lack of hostility to mainstream Buddhist traditions in the initial pre-Mahayana tradition is seen. For instance, in Louis Lancaster's assessment of the earliest Chinese version of the Asta Sahasrika, which is based on 8,000 verses, Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. Harrison sketches on the first Chinese translation of Mahayana Sutras, which is a body of small 11 texts, fashioned in the second half of the 2nd century CE. Also concludes that at some stage in this period, there was no strict division of the Buddhist Sangha into two antagonistic camps. Later Chinese sources explain that Chinese pilgrims to India found non-Mahayana and Mahayana monks in the same dwelling places or monasteries. The only difference seen among the two groups was that Mahayana monks showed admiration to figures of bodhisattvas, sympathetic attitude being on the path to full Buddhahood, while non-Mahayana monks not to choose this. So, while Indian Mahayana was budding as an alternative ambition and spiritual path from about the 1st century BCE, William concludes that a clear split group identity among Mahayana followers took centuries to open out. The Ajita Sena Sutra is an example of a Mahayana Sutra before the scheme of Mahayana as a unique institutional identification. It nevertheless shows an ongoing shift of ideas occurring prior to the later polarization and unification of Mahayana. Even if a new spirit had emerged, little evidence exists to recommend sectarian categories. Rather than use the term Mahayana, notes Harrison. Authors focus on the issues connected with the unfolding movement, such as the teachings on emptiness, which is called Shunyata or Shunyavad, the perfection of wisdom, Prajana Paramita, the 5 other perfection, skill in means, Upaya, Kosalya, and predominantly the work of the Bodhisattva, the one aspiring to Buddhahood. Also, the diverse types of Bodhisattvas are illustrious, especially the distinction between renunciant or monastic Bodhisattvas and householder or lay Bodhisattvas. To conclude, and depicting on cousins in the Mahayana, the Bodhisattva path, cosmology and wisdom are dexterously unified as had occurred to a degree in the preceding tradition. The ideal of the Bodhisattva path starts with the obstinacy to attain Buddhahood. Such a responsibility results in greater spiritual and karmic potency. Consequently, the realm of fabulous paradises and awe-inspiring spiritual beings to be visualized open up. Equally, such astounding results reinforce the attractiveness of the Bodhisattva path. Though to follow the path, the perfections need to be developed, the utmost being the perfection of wisdom, which is the awareness of emptiness. In this way, the Indian Mahayana kept an unbiased combination trait of the Buddhist spiritual path from its beginning, beyond the ideas of former Buddhism. In time, Indian Mahayana went ahead of the ideas and tendencies of the early schools of Buddhism. Bodhicitta involves a thoughtful intention to liberate both oneself and all beings from agony. This became the unique, inspiring power of a bodhisattva, giving them their powers of wisdom and compassion. In addition, bodhicitta enables the bodhisattva to rupture through the illusion of self and other. Thus, it was understood that the bodhisattva was to produce bodhicitta, which is the awakened mind, the compassionate aspiration for enlightenment. Three bodies of Buddha came to be understood as: first, the Nirmana Kaya, the fashioned body, the alteration body, the manifestation body is seen in time and space to teach and liberate beings, such as the earthly Buddhas, particularly as incarnate by Siddhartha Gautama. Second, the Sambhogakaya, the enjoyment body, the body of bliss, the reward body, is seen as referring to the Buddhas in their heavens, having been pleased for their spiritual practice. Thirdly, the Dharmakaya, truth body, is seen as embody the true nature of the Buddha, the belief of enlightenment and the teachings of the Buddha, as well as being recognized with shunyata. Thought in the Indian Mahayana came to teach the emptiness of all the phenomena, including all parts. Nothing which has come into being has any eternalness. That is, nothing has real existence in that nothing exists autonomously. Neither seen as nihilism nor pessimism, it is this non-fixity which makes liberation achievable. In fact, liberation is the recognition of this emptiness. It is nothing and flee to somewhere else. Rather, it is an altered understanding of this world itself. The Mahayana came to be known as a Bodhisattvayana, or the vehicle of Bodhisattvas. In this greater new vehicle, thoughtful understanding was seen in the supreme wisdom taught in compassion, now directed at the salvation of innumerable beings and in the goal of nothing less than omniscient Buddhahood. Teachings on these subjects represented a very deeper level of description of the Buddha's message. Therefore, skillful means and compassion reached new heights. Those who did not believe the new sutras, the vehicle of the disciple, Sarvakayana, and vehicle of the solitary Buddha, Pratyeka Buddha Yana. Those who intended to become Arhats and Pratyeka Buddhas, respectively, began to disapprove of the new movement, that is, the Bodhisattvayana or spiritual vehicle of the Bodhisattva. As a result, those accused responded to the criticism by emphasizing the dominance of the Bodhisattvayana and referring to it as the Mahayana, the great vehicle, or vehicle the great. Based on Williams, the initial date for the new sutras is from the 2nd or 1st century BCE. They were seen as the word of the Buddha, and it was claiming this position that led them to being doubtful as genuine sutras by others. As time went on, some Mahayana sutras uttered antagonism towards those who failed to react to the message of the new text. They calculatedly used the term inferior way a Hinayana. Later dissimilar expression. The Mahayana emerged into history, Harvey notes, as a free confederacy of groups, each connected with one or more of a number of new sutras. The question arises whether, no matter which unites the disparate later expressions of Mahayana, both a disunited view and a united standpoint may be presented. On the other hand, it may be concluded that incongruent later expressions of Mahayana were not united. According to Harvey, as ideas of the dissimilar sutras, new sutras were also dissimilar in style and tone. Were drawn on, later Mahayanists incorporated their ideas and systematized them in contending ways depending on which text was seen to contain the most entire truth. This process continued in Northern and Eastern Buddhism, which also took on unusual emphasis in their own development. Williams sports a disunited view when he writes that Mahayana is a very assorted. It is used as a family term covering a variety of not necessarily matching or even compatible practices and teachings. Thus, Mahayana could not itself be a school of Buddhism any. It lacks that sort of unity. On the other hand, Harvey suggests that the incongruent later expressions of the Mahayana were united. As fundamental theme for this position is in the sense that the new sutras were the word of the Buddha. First, the new sutras were seen as inspired expressions coming from the Buddha, now understood as still contactable through meditative visions and vivid dreams. Secondly, the new sutras were recognized as the outcome of the identical kind of perfect wisdom which was the basis of the Buddha's own teachings of the Dharma. Thirdly, in later Mahayana, the new sutras were viewed as teachings concealed by the Buddha in the world of serpent deities or Nagas, until there were humans capable of seeing the deeper implications of his message and who would reciprocate the teachings by means of meditative powers. Importantly, each clarification saw the new sutras as arising directly or indirectly from meditative experiences. Williams concurs with Harvey as far as a unified perspective when he writes that Mahayana is united perhaps solely by a vision of the eventual goal for those capable of it, of attaining full Buddhahood for the advantage of all sentient beings, the Bodhisattva ideal, and also eventually a belief that Buddhas are still about and can be contacted, hence the possibility of an ongoing revelation. In concluding, while both a disunited view and a united view standpoint may be valid, one may also complement both outlooks. The Mahayana, great path or vehicle, with its set of novel teachings is an extraordinary reinterpretation of the Dharma. In this, there has been both continuity and change. On the one hand, the Buddha's basic and indispensable principles of the four true realities for the spiritually ennobled have been retained. On the other hand, many of the Buddha's original teachings have been brought to new levels of considerate and some even transcended. Furthermore, the Buddha is now understood as accessible, no longer out of the way at peace. He is effectively and eternally involved in leading all to enlightenment out of his compassion. Finally, the path involves appealing with the world out of compassion rather than only renouncing the world. In exploring the origins of Indian Mahayana, three views have been obtainable: sectarian origin, raised questions about understanding Buddhist sect configuration, initial acceptance of emerging Indian Mahayana literature, origins of Indian Mahayana as a disconnect tradition, and the new vision of Buddhism. Lay origins uncovered difficulties concern lack of evidence for lay origins of Indian Mahayana, religious innovation not made by laity, conservation of innovative texts and lack of evidence from earliest extant Mahayana literature. Finally, the role of forest dwelling monks presented a reasonable origin for Indian Mahayana due to evidence from Mahayana Sutra as well as Maitreya Mahasimhana the Sutra or Lion's Roar of Maitreya. Indian Mahayana was a continuation of trends in previous Buddhism as: first, early Buddhism has placed elevated value on the inspiration of concern for others. The Arhat was seen as one who went forth for the well-being of the world. While the dominance of humane action was recognized in Mahayana, the compassionate aspiration of the Arhat is brought to a top, sublime level in the Bodhisattva. Second, in earlier Buddhism, the Indian deities Brahma and Indra, known as Sakka, played a significant role according to the Pali Suttas. Their names and much of their nature originated from devotional responses to the Buddha, even though the Mahayana pulled earlier meditation and cosmology elements in a new way and developed a cosmology emphasizing faith. The Buddha was now seen as glorified and transcendent being. Earlier Indian deities were eclipsed by new figures, Buddhas and spiritually sophisticated Bodhisattvas. Third, In earlier Buddhism, there was immanent meditation and related Abhidhamma thought. In the Mahayana, on the other hand, a fresh philosophical concentrate of emptiness developed, the emptiness of phenomena and ultimate wisdom were now emphasized. Fourthly, in early Buddhism, the scheme of one way existed. For example, in the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the Buddha is said to have stated, I quote, "There is monks this one way," unquote. Nonetheless, it is certainly evident that the Mahayana exposed that the Buddha has one vehicle, Ikayana, the Buddha vehicle, but has used the skillful means of three, the vehicle of the disciple, solitary Buddha, and Bodhisattva. Finally, some of the earliest extant Mahayana literature, talking about Chinese translations of Mahayana Sutras by Lokasema in the late 2nd century CE, does not demonstrate any antagonism towards monasticism, the Sangha, in early Buddhism. On the other hand, Indian Mahayana was also innovative. First, in Mahayana, the Bodhisattva strives to bring all beings all through time and space to final liberation. Bodhicitta becomes an incessant activity, not only an inspiration. The Bodhisattva does not retreat from the world but remains compassionately caught up. In his wisdom, he recognized the true nature of reality. In his compassion, he has a kindness of heart and empathy. Second, in Mahayana, the idea of the Buddha and his Dharma evolved into a more elaborate system called Trikaya, or the three bodies, Kayas of the Buddha. It explained how the Buddha manifests in the world of form to work for the liberation of all beings. Third, with a new perspective on spiritual legality, the Mahayana adopted open, ongoing revelation. As a result, a large number of new sutras were fashioned in India up to around 650 CE. Often composed by numerous authors elaborating a basic text, these works frequently comprised hundreds of pages. Fourthly, in relation to skill in means, the Mahayana was viewed as higher in three ways: its motivation, compassion directed towards the salvation of countless beings; its goal, omniscient Buddhahood; and its profundity, supreme wisdom. Teachings on these subjects represented a far deeper stage of clarification of the Buddha's message. Finally, the new texts advocate a vision termed Mahayana, the great way, the way to the great, or the greatest way. In time, this great way was more and more contrasted with an inferior way which they call as Hinayana, and sometimes the contrast was tinted with unkind and even harsh language. In concluding, while later incongruent expression of Mahayana occurred, a unity remains amidst its diversity. A unity seen in the essential Dharma that has been breathtakingly reinterpreted through the sensibility of both continuity and change. Thus, after analyzing the history of emergence, endeavor, and philosophical approach of Mahayana Buddhism, one can say firstly, it broadened the reach of Buddhism not only in the Indian subcontinent but far away, as it reached also to many Southeast Asian regions where it became popular by the name of Zen school, and secondly, it gained political patronage and vast popular support. Dear students, that was all about today's lecture regarding Mahayana Buddhism. Hope you all have understood it well. We shall meet again with a new topic. Till then, take care and goodbye.